She accepted a house in ruins, without knowing that inside lay a secret that would change everything. Sarah Mitchell looked at the crumpled paper in her hands as her 5 children cried from hunger around her. The eviction had been confirmed, and she had only 3 days to leave the small room she rented in downtown Eureka Springs. The money from her last job as a cleaner had run out, and none of the houses where she had knocked on doors needed her services. That's when the letter arrived, brought by a mail carrier who found her sitting on the sidewalk with her children. An inheritance from an Aunt Dorothy, whom she didn't even know existed, a house in the countryside, a 2-hour bus ride from the city. "Mom, are we going to have a real house?" asked Emily, the eldest at just 10 years old, holding her little sister Lily in her lap. "Yes, my dear." "Yes, we are," replied Sarah, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. The lawyer who had sent the letter was clear on the phone. The property was in the name of Dorothy Mitchell Anderson, who had passed away with no other known heirs. Through genealogical research, they discovered that Sarah was her only living niece. "But I've never heard of this aunt," Sarah told the lawyer. "Sometimes families drift apart for many years, ma'am. The important thing is that you have the legal right to the property." 2 days later, Sarah was on the bus with her 5 children and 2 bags containing everything they owned. Baby Noah cried in her lap, while the 7-year-old twins, Ethan and Mason, pressed against the window watching the rural landscape. Emily helped with little Lily, who had just turned 3. The journey seemed endless. Sarah felt a mix of hope and fear growing in her chest. What would this house be like? Would it be livable? Would it have water and electricity? When the bus stopped at the small station of St. Vincent Green River, a rural district of Eureka Springs, Sarah got off with the children and looked around. The place was even smaller than she had imagined. A few scattered houses, a general store that served as a grocery, a post office and bus stop, and lots of lush greenery all around. "Mrs. Dorothy's house is up that way, following this little dirt road," explained the bus driver, pointing to a path that disappeared among the trees. "About 2 leagues from here." Sarah thanked him and began walking with the children. The sun was strong and the bags were heavy in her arms. Ethan complained he was thirsty, Mason cried saying his feet hurt, and Emily did what she could to cheer up her little siblings. After an hour of walking, they spotted a structure among the trees. Sarah felt her heart race. There was the house that would change their lives. But as they approached, relief turned to despair. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The house Sarah saw was nothing but a ruin. The roof was completely destroyed, with half the tiles fallen on the ground and wooden beams exposed to the elements. The adobe walls, though still standing, had large cracks and holes. The front door hung by a single hinge, and there were no panes in the windows. "Mom, are we going to live there?" asked Emily, her voice frightened. Sarah couldn't answer. She sat on a fallen log and began to cry. She had spent the last dollars she had on the bus fare. There was no way back. She had nowhere to go. The children gathered around, also scared. Noah cried in her lap, perhaps sensing his mother's despair. "Don't cry, Mom," said Ethan, touching her arm. "We can fix it." "It's true," agreed Mason. "Grandpa always said every problem has a solution." Sarah wiped her tears and looked at her children. They watched her with confidence, hoping she would find a solution as she always did. She couldn't give up now. "You're right," she said, standing up. "Let's see what it's like inside." They walked to the door. Sarah pushed it slowly, and it opened with a loud creak. The interior was better than the exterior, though still precarious. The floor was made of wooden planks, some loose but most intact. There were 3 small rooms and an improvised kitchen in the back. "At least it's not raining in here," observed Emily, looking at the ceiling. It was true. Though damaged, the roof of this part of the house still protected from the weather. There were even some old pieces of furniture scattered about, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a rusty wood-burning stove. "Let's clean everything," decided Sarah. "We'll sleep right here tonight." The children, infected by their mother's new spirit, began to help. Emily swept the floor with a branch found in the yard. The twins gathered pieces of wood to make an improvised fire. Even little Lily tried to help by carrying smaller twigs. When night fell, they were all sitting around a small fire in the yard. Sarah had found an old pot and managed to make a thin soup with the few vegetables she had brought. It wasn't much, but it was warm and staved off hunger. "Tomorrow we'll go to the village to look for work," said Sarah, looking at the stars shining brightly in the clear country sky. "And little by little we'll fix up our house." "Our house," repeated Emily, smiling for the first time that day. The next morning Sarah woke up early. The baby Noah had cried all night, bothered by the cold and dampness. The other children had slept poorly on the hard floor, covered only by the few blankets they owned. She decided to go to the village to see if she could find some work. She left Emily in charge of her siblings with a promise to return by noon. At the general store in St. Vincent Green River, she spoke with Mr. Howard, the owner. "Are you the new resident of Mrs. Dorothy's house?" he asked, curious. "Yes, I am. I'm her niece, Sarah Mitchell." Mr. Howard looked at her with surprise. "Niece? Mrs. Dorothy always said she had no family." "Well, I didn't know I had an aunt either. I only found out when I received the lawyer's letter about the inheritance." The merchant scratched his grey beard, thoughtful. "How strange. Mrs. Dorothy lived here for over 40 years and never mentioned any relatives. She was a very private woman, you know. Did you know her well?" "Know her? Know her? Nobody really knew Mrs. Dorothy. She came here once a month to buy the basics, always paid on time, but wasn't one for conversation. All I know is she lived alone in that house for decades." Sarah felt a shiver. There was something strange about the whole situation. "May I ask something? Was the house always like this, all run down?" "No, not at all. Up until about 2 years ago it was well kept. It was after Mrs. Dorothy fell ill that it started to deteriorate. She couldn't manage the upkeep anymore, and after she passed, the rains did the rest." "When did she pass away?" "About 6 months ago. They found her in bed, sleeping. At least she didn't suffer, poor thing." Sarah thanked him for the information and asked about work. Mr. Howard said he sometimes needed help at the store and knew some families who hired day laborers. "But I'll tell you something," he added, lowering his voice. "If I were you, I'd look for Mrs. Helen. She lives in the greenhouse, past the church. She was the only person here who had any sort of friendship with your aunt." Sarah thanked him and headed for the indicated house. It was a simple but well-kept building, with a garden in front and a porch where an elderly woman was sitting knitting. "Mrs. Helen." The woman looked up. She must have been in her 70s, white hair in a bun, with a kind but attentive gaze. "Yes, that's me. And you are?" "Sarah Mitchell. I'm Mrs. Dorothy's niece. I inherited her house." The knitting fell from Mrs. Helen's hands. She turned pale and stood up slowly. "Niece? Dorothy had a niece." "It seems so. I didn't know either." Mrs. Helen observed her carefully, as if trying to find something familiar in her face. "Come in, my dear. Come in and let's talk." Mrs. Helen's house was cozy and smelled nice. She made some coffee and sat at the table facing Sarah. "Tell me everything from the beginning. How did you find out about the inheritance?" Sarah recounted the whole story, the letter from the lawyer, the trip with the children, discovering the state of the house. "And you had never heard of Dorothy before?" "Never. My mother always said we had no family. She had me very young and my father disappeared before I was born. My mother died when I was 17, from pneumonia. Since then, I've been managing on my own with the children." Mrs. Helen was silent for a while, stirring her coffee slowly. "Dorothy was a very sad woman," she finally said. "In her later years, when she was weaker, she sometimes spoke of a niece she had lost contact with. She said she was forced to give the little girl to other people to raise when she was very small." Sarah's heart raced. "Give the little girl to other people to raise?" "Yes, she said she had a younger sister who got pregnant very young. The family was going through terrible hardship at the time, and the sister ended up giving the child to a family in the city who promised to take good care of her. And that child was my mother." "It could be, my dear." Dorothy never said the name, but she always blamed herself for not trying to find her niece after her own situation improved. Sarah felt as if the ground were moving beneath her feet. All these discoveries about her family, about her origins. "Mrs. Helen, do you know if anything of my aunt's was left in the house? Documents, photos, anything that could tell me more about my family?" "When she passed, we didn't touch anything inside. We just closed up the house and waited for a relative to come claim it. Everything must be as it was. Could you come with me there? The children and I are trying to clean and organize, but perhaps you could help me understand her things better." Mrs. Helen agreed. After lunch, they went together to the dilapidated house. The children ran to greet the visitor, and Mrs. Helen was delighted with them. "What beautiful boys you have," she said, stroking Lily's hair. "Thank you. They are my life." They entered the house and Mrs. Helen showed where Dorothy's belongings were. There was an old dresser in the main bedroom with some stuck drawers. "This is where she kept important papers," said Mrs. Helen, trying to open one of the drawers. With Ethan and Mason's help, they managed to force the drawer open. Inside were old documents, some yellowed photos, and letters tied with string. Sarah picked up one of the photos and almost dropped it. It was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, holding a baby. The resemblance to Sarah was striking. "My God," murmured Mrs. Helen, "it's like looking at you with Noah. Could this be my grandmother? Dorothy's mother? Could be. Or perhaps it's your mother as a baby with your grandmother." Sarah examined other documents, old certificates, some bills, receipts. In one of the letters she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a letter addressed to Dear Jennifer, dated 1990, the same name as her mother. "Mrs. Helen, look at this." They read the letter together. It was from Dorothy to her sister Jennifer, saying she had gotten a better job and was saving money to get her daughter back. It spoke of how much she missed her and how she regretted having allowed her to be raised by others. "My mother's name was Jennifer," said Sarah, her voice emotional. "So you really are Dorothy's niece." She was telling the truth when she said she had a lost niece. They continued sorting through the papers. They found more letters, all addressed to Jennifer, but all unsent, as if Dorothy had written them but never had the courage to send them. In one of the more recent letters, dated just 2 years ago, Dorothy wrote, "My dear sister Jennifer, if you are reading this letter, it is because someday I managed to find you, or because something happened to me and someone found these papers. I never stopped thinking about you and your daughter. I know I was wrong not to look for you sooner, but I was always afraid you wouldn't forgive me for letting them take the girl. I hope that one day I can meet my niece and ask for forgiveness for all these lost years." Sarah had tears in her eyes. "She wanted to find me." "She did, my dear. Dorothy carried that guilt her whole life." Emily, who had come closer to listen to the conversation, tugged on her mother's skirt. "Mom, I found something strange on the floor in the other room." They went to see what the girl had found. It was a floorboard that was loose, and when Emily tried to step on it, she noticed it gave way. "Careful," said Mrs. Helen. "It might have termites." Sarah crouched down and tried to lift the board. It was indeed loose. When she lifted it, she discovered a small hollow space underneath. "What is this?" "I don't know," said Mrs. Helen. "Dorothy never told me about any hiding place." Sarah reached her hand into the hole and felt something. It was a metal box about the size of a shoebox. They carefully removed the box. It was rusty but closed. There was no padlock, just a simple latch. "Should we open it?" asked Sarah. "It's your house now," replied Mrs. Helen. Carefully, Sarah opened the box. Inside were more photos, documents that looked very old, and something that took her breath away. Birth, marriage, and death certificates for people with the last name Mitchell. "These are family documents," said Mrs. Helen, examining the papers. One of the certificates was for the birth of Jennifer Mitchell Anderson. Mother, Margaret Mitchell Anderson. Father, Thomas Mitchell Anderson. "This is my mother's birth certificate," said Sarah, moved. There was also a birth certificate for Dorothy Mitchell Anderson with the same parents, but what caught their attention most was a series of documents about properties, deeds for land, property registration certificates, all in the name of Thomas Mitchell Anderson. "Mrs. Helen, did my grandfather have other properties?" The elderly woman examined the documents carefully. "From what's here, your family had several properties in the region, large plots of land, some with water springs. What happened to those properties?" "I don't know, my dear. Dorothy never mentioned anything about it. She always lived modestly, as if she had nothing but the house." Sarah felt a suspicion growing in her chest. If her family had all these properties, why did Dorothy live in hardship? Why was her mother given up for adoption due to lack of resources? "There's something wrong here," she murmured. "What do you mean?" "If my family had all this land, why did my aunt live alone in a crumbling house? Why was my mother given up for adoption because of financial difficulties?" Mrs. Helen didn't know how to answer, but agreed there was something strange about the story. "I need to investigate this," Sarah decided. "I need to find out what happened to the family properties." "You could go to the county clerk's office in Eureka Springs. They have all the records there." "That's a good idea. But first I need to find a way to earn money to support the children." Mrs. Helen offered domestic work and said she would recommend Sarah to other families in the area. She also offered to look after the children when needed. "You and the children can stay at my house until you can get yours sorted out," she offered. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Helen. You've been an angel in our lives." That night, in Mrs. Helen's cozy home, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the documents she had found. There was something bigger behind that whole story, something she needed to discover. The children slept peacefully for the first time in days, in a clean, warm house. Noah finally stopped crying and was able to rest. "Mrs. Helen?" Sarah called softly, finding the elderly woman in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the next day. "Yes, dear. Do you know any lawyer or someone who understands documents here in the region? There's Dr. Charles in Eureka Springs. He's a retired lawyer but still helps people with documentation issues. He's a very honest man." "Do you think I should talk to him about these deeds?" "I think so. If your family really owned those properties, you have a right to know what happened to them." The next morning, Sarah went with Mrs. Helen to Eureka Springs. They left the children with a neighbor of Mrs. Helen's and caught the first bus. Dr. Charles's office was on a street near the historic center. He was a man of about 60, tall with graying hair and reading glasses. "Mrs. Sarah, Mrs. Helen told me about your situation on the phone. Did you bring the documents?" Sarah handed over all the paperwork she had found. Dr. Charles examined everything carefully, taking notes in a notebook. "These documents are very interesting," he said after a few minutes. "Your grandfather, Thomas Mitchell Anderson, really did own several valuable properties in the region. And what happened to them? From what I see here, the properties were sold between 1985 and 1990, all to the same person, Richard Mitchell Anderson." "Mitchell Anderson, could he be a relative?" "It's possible. Could be a brother or cousin of your grandfather. Do you know of any other family relatives?" "No. My mother always said we had no family." Dr. Charles continued examining the papers. "Here's something strange. The sales were all done by power of attorney. Your grandfather had given power of attorney to this Richard to negotiate the properties. And is that normal?" "It can be, if he was sick or unable to handle the transactions personally. But I'll need to check at the county clerk's offices to see if these sales were legitimate." "How so?" "Sometimes people take advantage of powers of attorney to make deals that weren't in the real owner's interest. I need to check the dates of the sales, the amounts, the circumstances." Sarah felt a mix of hope and anxiety. If we find out there was something irregular, what can be done? Depending on the case, it might be possible to reverse the sales or get compensation. But I'll be honest with you, they will be lengthy and complicated processes. Even so, I would like to investigate. I need to know the truth about my family. Dr. Charles promised to start the investigations and said he would get in touch in a few days with the first results. Back in St. Vincent Green River, Sarah began working as a house cleaner in the homes Mrs. Helen had recommended. Meanwhile, she continued organizing the house she inherited from Dorothy with the children. During one of the cleanings, while removing debris from the back room, Mason found a few more loose floorboards. This time, they discovered a small wooden chest buried under the floor. "Mom, there's another hiding place," the boy shouted, excited. Sarah opened the chest carefully. Inside were more letters, these even older, and some photos that took her breath away. One of the photos showed a tall, strong man next to a woman and two little girls. On the back it was written, "Thomas, Margaret, Dorothy and Jennifer, 1975. "These are my grandparents and my aunts," murmured Sarah. The letters were correspondence between Thomas and a person identified only as R. In the more recent letters, Thomas expressed concern about the family's financial situation and asked R for help in resolving some problems with the properties. A letter from 1984 said, "Dear Brother R, I am very ill and can no longer manage the business. I need your help to sell some land and secure the girl's future. I trust you will do what's best for the family." R must be that Richard the doctor mentioned, Sarah said to Mrs. Helen, who had come to help with the cleaning. "It seems your grandfather was indeed ill and asked his brother for help. But then why did Dorothy live in hardship? If the land was sold to help the family, where is the money?" It was a question that wouldn't leave Sarah's mind. With each passing day, more questions arose about her family's past. 3 days later, Dr. Charles called Mrs. Helen with news from the investigations. "Sarah, I need you to come here urgently. I've discovered some very important things about your family's properties." The next day, Sarah was again in the lawyer's office. This time he had an even larger stack of documents on his desk. "Miss Sarah, your suspicions were correct. There are several irregularities in the property sales." "What kind of irregularities?" "First, the amounts. The lands were sold for prices far below the market value at the time. Second, there are no records that the money from the sales ever reached your Aunt Dorothy." "How is that possible?" "From what I've been able to ascertain, Richard Mitchell Anderson sold all the properties but never transferred the proceeds to the family. There are indications that he appropriated the money." Sarah felt a growing anger in her chest. "You mean he stole my family's inheritance?" "That's what it appears, and there's more. This Richard is still alive. He lives in Eureka Springs, in a large house in the wealthy neighborhood. From what I've discovered, he became wealthy precisely around the time he sold your family's properties. Is it possible to do anything? I can try to file a lawsuit to recover the value or the properties, but it will be a difficult fight, as many years have passed. Even so, I want to try. I can't let the injustice done to my family go." Dr. Charles agreed to take the case. He said he would start by preparing a formal demand letter to Richard, giving him the opportunity to resolve the matter amicably before going to court. "And if he denies everything? Then we go to a legal battle. But I want you to know it could be a long and costly process. I don't have the money to pay a lawyer, Doctor. Don't worry about that for now. When I met your Aunt Dorothy, I promised that if any of her family ever appeared, I would help however I could. I'll consider this a debt of gratitude." Sarah returned to St. Vincent Green River with mixed feelings. On one hand, she was excited about the possibility of recovering what was rightfully her family's. On the other, she was afraid of confronting a person who apparently had no scruples. "Mrs. Helen, do you know this Richard Mitchell Anderson?" "I know him by name. He has a large company in Eureka Springs. He works with buying and selling land. They say he's a very rich man, but not very well liked in the region. Why isn't he well liked? There are rumors that he's made many questionable deals over the years. He buys land from desperate people for low prices, speculates with rural properties, that sort of thing. So it won't be easy to deal with him." "Not at all, my dear, but you are right to fight for what is yours." That week, while Sarah worked at houses in the area, the children continued exploring and cleaning the inherited home. Ethan and Mason, always curious, discovered there was a small shed in the back of the property, somewhat hidden by the vegetation that had grown around it. "Mom, we found a little house back there," they told her when she returned from work. They all went together to investigate. It was a simple structure with wooden walls and a tin roof. The door was locked with a rusty padlock. "Do you think there's more of Aunt Dorothy's stuff inside?" asked Emily. With the help of a rock, they managed to break the padlock. Inside the shed were old tools, some broken furniture, and several stacked boxes. One of the boxes contained more documents. This time they were land lease contracts, payment receipts and correspondence that helped Sarah better understand her family's situation. It was a letter from a bank, dated 1983, demanding payment for a loan taken out by Thomas Mitchell Anderson. The debt was high and the bank threatened to seize the properties as collateral. "Now it's starting to make sense," murmured Sarah. "My grandfather was in debt and needed to ask his brother for help." In a smaller box, she found something that moved her deeply. Love letters between her grandparents, photos of their wedding, and even some toys that must have belonged to her mother and Aunt Dorothy when they were children. "Look, Mom," said Lily, picking up a faded cloth doll. "It's just like mine." It was a touching moment. Sarah felt as if she were finally getting to know her family, discovering the roots she never knew she had. But the most important discovery was at the bottom of the last box. It was a notebook where Dorothy had written a kind of diary in the last years of her life. The entries began in 2018 and went until a few months before her death. On most pages, she wrote about loneliness, missing her family, and regrets. In an entry from December 2020, Dorothy wrote, "I received a letter from Richard today. He's worried because he found out I've been asking questions about the properties Dad sold. He said if I keep stirring up the past, I could have problems. I don't understand why he gets nervous. If everything was done correctly, he shouldn't be afraid of my questions." Sarah felt a chill. Dorothy had suspected something. The next entry, from January 2021, was even more revealing. "I managed to get copies of the sales documents from the county clerk's office. The amounts are far below what the land was worth, and there's no record of the money being deposited into our account. I need to confront Richard with this information." And the last entry on the subject from March 2021. "Richard came here today. He was very nervous and upset. He said I shouldn't be making up stories about business I don't understand. He threatened that if I kept asking questions, I might even lose this house. I got scared. Maybe it's better to let things be. But my heart aches thinking of Jennifer and the granddaughter I never met. If they only knew they were robbed." Sarah was trembling when she finished reading. "Mrs. Helen," she called, showing the notebook. "Dorothy knew she had been robbed." Mrs. Helen read the entries and was outraged. "That man threatened a sick, lonely woman. What kind of person does that?" "A person with a lot to hide," replied Sarah, determined. "Now I'm even more certain I need to fight for justice." The next day, Sarah called Dr. Charles and told him about the discoveries in Dorothy's diary. "This is very important," said the lawyer. "We now have evidence that Dorothy herself suspected irregularities. This strengthens our case considerably. What do we do now?" "I'll expedite the pre-litigation notice. With this new evidence, I can be more direct with the accusations." 3 days later, Dr. Charles sent a formal notification to Richard Mitchell Anderson, demanding explanations about the property sales and the destination of the money. The response came quickly, through an expensive lawyer from Charlotte. The letter was threatening, denying any irregularities and warning that they would sue Sarah for defamation if she continued with the baseless accusations. "He's nervous," said Dr. Charles over the phone. "Honest people don't respond with threats. And now? Now we go to court. I'll prepare a lawsuit for debt collection and damages." But the next day, something unexpected happened. Sarah was working at Mrs. Regina's house when an elegant man showed up at Dorothy's property asking for her. Emily, who was watching the younger siblings, got scared and sent Ethan running to the house where his mother was working to warn her. "Mom, there's a man in a suit wanting to talk to you back home," said the boy, breathless. Sarah interrupted her work and ran home. She found the man talking with Mrs. Helen in the backyard, while the children watched from a distance. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" asked the man when she arrived. "I am. What do you want?" "My name is Dr. Raymond. I am the accountant for the Mitchell Anderson family. I came to talk about the inheritance you received." Sarah immediately became suspicious. "What inheritance? This house was left to me by my aunt." "Yes, but there is a complicated issue. There are other heirs with rights to this property." "Other heirs? What other heirs?" "Direct descendants of Mr. Thomas Mitchell Anderson. The transfer of this house to you may have been irregular." Mrs. Helen approached. "What kind of talk is this? Dorothy left everything properly to her niece." "Mrs. Helen, with all due respect, you don't understand legal matters. There are documents proving this property should have passed to other family members." Sarah felt her blood boil. "And who are these other family members?" "Mr. Richard Mitchell Anderson, the eldest brother of Mr. Thomas, has priority rights over the assets left behind." "Ah, so that's it," said Sarah, understanding the game. "Mr. Richard sent you here to intimidate me." "It's not intimidation, Mrs. Sarah. It's a legal matter. Mr. Richard is willing to make a friendly agreement." He will buy your share of the inheritance for a fair price. And what would that fair price be? 5,000 rees for the house and the land. Mrs. Helen laughed ironically. 5,000 rees. This land alone is worth over 50,000. Mrs. Helen, the house is in ruins. The value we are offering is more than it's worth in its current state. Sarah was furious but tried to stay calm. Dr. Raymond, you can tell Mr. Richard that I have no interest in selling my inheritance. This property legally belongs to me. Mrs. Sarah, I advise you to think carefully before refusing our offer. Legal matters can become very complicated and costly. Are you threatening me? I am merely warning you about the possible consequences of a legal dispute. After the man left, Sarah immediately called Dr. Charles. Doctor, they're trying to pressure me. They sent an accountant here offering 5,000 rees for the property. 5,000? That confirms they know the property is worth much more. They're trying to take advantage of your difficult situation. I'll stand firm, I won't sell for anything. Very well, I'll speed up our lawsuit. The more pressure they apply, the more evidence we have that something is wrong. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She was worried about the threats and about the children's future. What if she really lost the house? Where would they go? Mrs. Helen tried to calm her down. My dear, you have right on your side. Justice will recognize that. But what if it doesn't, Mrs. Helen? What if he is more powerful than I am? Money and power aren't everything, Sarah. The truth always comes out in the end. The next morning, Sarah decided she couldn't just wait for things to happen. She needed to act. Mrs. Helen, I'm going to do something that might seem crazy. What are you thinking? I'm going to look for this Richard in person. I want to look into the eyes of the man who stole from my family and tell him I know the truth. Sarah, that could be dangerous. It might be, but I can't just stay here while he tries to steal from me too. Against Mrs. Helen's advice, Sarah took the bus to Eureka Springs. She had gotten Richard's address from Dr. Charles. The house was in an upscale neighborhood of the city, a large, luxurious building with well-kept gardens. The contrast with the ruined house where she lived was stark. She rang the doorbell and was answered by a maid. I would like to speak with Mr. Richard Mitchell Anderson. The master is busy. Do you have an appointment? No, but it's about an urgent family matter concerning the Mitchell Andersons. The maid went to consult and returned a few minutes later. He can see you briefly. Sarah was led to a luxurious office. Richard Mitchell Anderson was a man of about 70, with white hair, well-dressed but with a hard expression on his face. So you are Aunt Dorothy's lost niece, he said, without rising from his armchair. I am Sarah Mitchell, and I want to know why you stole my family's inheritance. Richard laughed sarcastically. Stole? Girl, you don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I do. I read Dorothy's diary. I know you threatened her when she started asking questions about the sold properties. Richard's expression changed. It became more serious, more threatening. Dorothy was always a troubled woman. She was always making up stories. They weren't stories. I have documents that prove the lands were sold for well below market value and that the money never reached the family. And what do you intend to do with these theories of yours? I will go to court. I will recover everything you stole from my family. Richard stood up and walked to the window. Sarah, you seem like an intelligent woman. You have 5 children to raise. You're in a difficult situation. Why don't you accept my offer and use the money to start over somewhere else? Because I know I am entitled to much more than $5,000. 5,000? Who said anything about 5,000? Richard smiled. I am willing to pay 15,000 for your share of the inheritance. Sarah realized he was trying to negotiate, which meant he was nervous. And what if I say I wouldn't accept even 50,000? Then I would say, you are being very unwise. Legal matters can be complicated, especially for people who don't have the resources to pay for expensive lawyers. I already have a lawyer. That old Charles, Richard laughed. He's an idealist. He has no experience with complicated cases. Complicated like what? Are you threatening me? I'm just explaining reality. In the business world, it's not always the one who is right who wins. It's the one who has more resources. Sarah stood up. We'll see, Mr. Richard. We'll see who wins in the end. I hope you don't regret this decision, Sarah. The only thing I regret is not having known my family sooner. But now that I know the truth, I will fight to the finish." When she left Richard's luxurious house, Sarah was more determined than ever. She had seen the fear in his eyes when she mentioned the documents and Dorothy's diary. Back in St. Vincent Green River, she told Mrs. Helen everything. "You were very brave, my dear. But now he knows you won't give up easily. All the better. At least now everything is clear between us. Dr. Charles was worried when he found out about the meeting. Sarah, it was reckless to go there alone. Now he knows exactly what we have against him. But doctor, I also managed to realize that he's scared. If he had nothing to hide, he wouldn't have increased the offer from $5,000 to $15,000. That's true. And another thing, I received some interesting information from the county clerk's office. It seems Richard sold some of his family's original properties recently for very high prices." "How so?" "One of the farms he bought from his grandfather for $20,000 in 1985 was sold last year for $2 million to a mining company." Sarah almost fell off her chair. $2 million? That's right. And there's more. I found out that in the region, there are several companies interested in land for solar and wind energy projects. The value of rural properties has skyrocketed in recent years. So Richard knew the land was going to appreciate. Probably. He's been working in real estate speculation for decades. He must have had insider information about the projects being planned for the region. Sarah felt a mix of indignation and determination. That makes the theft even worse. He not only took the land, but also profited millions from it. Exactly, and that strengthens our case. We can ask not only for the return of the original properties, but also compensation for the illegally obtained profits. But do we still have a way to prove he acted in bad faith? I'm working on that. I've already requested copies of all documents related to the transactions from the county clerk. I'm also going to request an expert examination of the power of attorney contracts to verify if they're authentic. While awaiting the legal developments, Sarah continued working and taking care of the house restoration with the children. Each day they discovered something new about Dorothy's life and the family's history. One morning, while cleaning the yard, Mason shouted, "Mom, there's something buried down here." He had tripped on a loose stone and noticed there was something buried underneath. They dug carefully and found another metal box, this time larger and heavier. "Could it be treasure?" asked Ethan, excited. When they opened the box, Sarah almost fainted. Inside were antique jewelry, gold and silver coins, and a letter with instructions from Dorothy. The letter said, "If anyone from the family finds this box, know that I managed to save some valuable objects that belong to our parents. When Richard sold all the properties, he didn't know I had hidden some precious things that Daddy gave me before he died. These jewels and coins have been in the family for generations. If my niece ever showed up, I wanted her to have at least this as a real inheritance." "Mrs. Helen," called Sarah, running to the neighbor's house, "you need to see this." When Mrs. Helen saw the jewelry and read the letter, she was moved. Dorothy was always very clever. She knew Richard wouldn't leave anything for the family, so she hid what she could. "How much do you think this is worth?" "I don't know, my dear, but some of these pieces look very old. They could be worth quite a bit." Sarah decided to take the jewelry to be appraised in Eureka Springs. An experienced jeweler in town confirmed they were valuable pieces, some from the 19th century. "These pieces together are worth at least $100,000, said the jeweler. "Some are very rare." With that money, Sarah would finally be able to properly renovate the house and ensure stability for the children while waiting for the outcome of the lawsuit. But when she returned to St. Vincent Green River, she discovered something serious had happened. Mrs. Helen was nervous and the children seemed scared. "What happened?" asked Sarah. "Some men came here looking for you. They said they were from the government and wanted to check if the house was in adequate condition for the children to live in." "Government men?" "Yes. They asked the children a lot of questions, took pictures of the house, wrote everything down on a paper." "This is Richard's doing," said Sarah, furious. "He's trying to use social services against me." Emily approached her mother. "Mom, they asked if we had enough food, if there was a working bathroom, things like that." "And what did you say?" "The truth. That sometimes we go hungry, that the house's bathroom is broken, that we sleep on the floor." Sarah felt her world collapse. Technically, the children were right. The house conditions were still precarious, and she couldn't always guarantee enough food for everyone. Mrs. Helen, did they say when they'd be back? They said in a week there would be another visit with an official social worker. A week? That's not enough time to fix up the house. Sarah, you need to think fast. If they decide the conditions aren't suitable for the children, they can take my children away from me, Sarah finished, tears in her eyes. That night, Sarah didn't sleep a wink. She knew Richard had planned this to pressure her into accepting his offer. If she sold the property, she could rent a better house in town, and social services wouldn't have any more issues with the living conditions. It was a low blow, but effective. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The next morning, Sarah made a desperate decision. She would use the money from the jewels to do an emergency renovation on the house. Mrs. Helen, I need your help. Where can I find masons and carpenters who work fast? There's Sebastian and his sons. They work in construction and are very quick when needed. Sarah sought out Sebastian and explained the urgency of the situation. The man, moved by the story, gathered a team of relatives and friends to help. We'll sort this house out in a week, promised Sebastian. They started immediately. While the men worked on the roof and walls, Sarah and the children painted, cleaned, and organized the interior. Mrs. Helen arranged for borrowed beds, clean bedding, and even some furniture her neighbors wanted to donate. In 3 days, the transformation was impressive. The house was coming back to life. But on the 4th day, Sebastian called Sarah over to show her something he had found while repairing the bathroom. Mrs. Sarah, look at this. He had discovered an old pipe that ran under the house and continued to a water spring at the back of the property. Has this spring always been here? Asked Sarah. Always. Your grandfather Thomas built this piping system many years ago. The water here is top quality. And why didn't Dorothy use it? I don't think she even remembered this system anymore. In her last years, she got a bit forgetful about things. The discovery of the potable water spring was important not just for practicality, but also for the value it added to the property. Land with its own springs was highly valued in the region. On the 5th day, the house was unrecognizable. Painted walls, repaired roof, working bathroom, organized kitchen, bedrooms with beds and closets. The children were radiant. For the first time in their lives, they had a real home. It looks like a magazine house, said Emily, admiring the result. It's our real house, said Mason, jumping on the new bed. On the 6th day, Sarah used the remaining money from the jewels to buy food and new clothes for the children. She wanted them to be well-fed and well-dressed for the social worker's visit. Mrs. Helen helped organize everything so the house would make the best impression possible. If they come now, they won't have anything to complain about, she said, admiring the work done. On the morning of the official visit, Sarah was nervous but confident. The house was impeccable, the children clean and well-fed, everything working perfectly. When the social workers arrived, they were surprised by what they found. Is this the same house that was reported last week? Asked one of the assistants. Yes, it is. We did some urgent repairs, replied Sarah. They inspected the entire house, spoke individually with each child, checked the refrigerator, the cabinets, the hygiene conditions. Mrs. Sarah, I have to admit I'm impressed with the condition of the house. Everything is very well organized and clean, said the lead social worker. Thank you. I know it wasn't ideal before, but I'm doing my best to give my children the best. The children seem happy and healthy. I see no reason for concern at the moment. When the social workers left, Sarah hugged the children with relief. We did it, she said. They saw we are a real family. But the victory over social services was just the first step. 2 days later, Dr. Charles called with worrying news. Sarah, Richard has filed a lawsuit questioning the validity of Dorothy's will. He's claiming she wasn't mentally fit to make decisions when she left the inheritance to you. But that's a lie. She was lucid when she wrote the will. I know, but they found a witness who says Dorothy was having memory problems in her later years. What witness? A doctor who treated her a few times, Dr. Marcus Thompson. Sarah knew the name. Dorothy had mentioned this doctor in her diary. Dr. Charles, in Dorothy's diary, she writes about this doctor. She suspected he was taking money from Richard to say she was sick. Really? Where is that written? I'll look for it and bring it to you today. Sarah found the passage in the diary where Dorothy wrote about her suspicions regarding Dr. Marcus. Dr. Marcus came here today saying, I need to have some head exams, that I'm getting forgetful. But I know I'm not. I remember everything just fine. Is he trying to convince me I'm sick? I have a feeling Richard may have spoken to him. This changes everything, said Dr. Charles when he read the excerpt. We have evidence there was a conspiracy to declare Dorothy incompetent. And what do we do now? I'll request an investigation into this doctor's finances. If he really received money from Richard, we'll find out. Meanwhile, Sarah's life had found a more stable routine. With the house in order and a little money saved from the sale of the jewelry, she could work more peacefully, and the children were attending a local school. Emily, the eldest, proved to be very intelligent and responsible. She helped with her younger siblings and still managed to get good grades in school. Mum, when I grow up, I want to study law to help you with these family matters, she said one day. I'm so proud, my daughter. You'll be an excellent lawyer. The twins Ethan and Mason adapted well to life in the country. They loved exploring the surroundings of the property and playing by the spring. Little Lily was developing well, talking more and showing herself to be a smart and affectionate child. And baby Noah was healthier and calmer, benefiting from the fresh air and stability of the new life. But the peace didn't last long. 3 weeks after the social worker's visit, Sarah received a court summons to appear at a hearing regarding the validity of Dorothy's will. The moment of truth has arrived, said Dr. Charles. We need to prepare well for this hearing. In the days leading up to the hearing, Dr. Charles worked intensely gathering evidence and witnesses. I've obtained some important information about Dr. Marcus, he said. Over the last 5 years, he received several deposits into his bank account from a company linked to Richard. Does that prove he was being paid to lie? It's strong evidence. I also found other elderly patients he declared incapacitated under questionable circumstances. What about the family's original properties? I have news on that too. The forensic analysis of the power of attorney documents revealed tampering. Your grandfather's signatures were forged on some contracts. Sarah felt a mix of hope and nervousness. Does this mean we can win? We have a good chance, but we must not underestimate Richard's resources. He hired a team of expensive lawyers from Charlotte. On the day of the hearing, Sarah was at the door of the courthouse in Eureka Springs, accompanied by Dr. Charles and Mrs. Helen, who had offered to be a witness. On the other side, Richard arrived with 3 lawyers and Dr. Marcus. Looks like we came to a war, commented Mrs. Helen. It is a war indeed, replied Dr. Charles, a war for truth and justice. The hearing began with Richard's lawyers presenting arguments about Sebastiana's alleged mental incapacity. Dr. Marcus testified that she had serious memory problems and was not fit to make important decisions. When it was the defense's turn, Dr. Charles presented Dorothy's diary, showing she was lucid and aware she was being manipulated. Your Honor, said Dr. Charles to the judge, this woman was not only lucid but fully aware she was the victim of a conspiracy to steal her family's assets. He then presented the evidence about the payments made to Dr. Marcus and the forgeries in the power of attorney documents. Mrs. Helen was called to testify and spoke emotionally about her friendship with Dorothy. Doctor, I lived with Dorothy for over 20 years. She never had memory problems. She remembered everything perfectly, even things that happened decades ago. What she had was sadness from being alone and regret for not having sought out her family sooner. Lastly, Sarah was called to testify. With a firm and emotional voice, she told her whole story. Your Honor, I grew up not knowing I had a family. My mother went through hardships, I went through hardships, my children went through hardships. Meanwhile, the man who was supposed to take care of our family's assets was getting rich with what wasn't his. My Aunt Dorothy lived alone and sad until the end of her life because of this. I'm not asking for wealth, I'm asking for justice. After hearing all the testimonies and analyzing the evidence, the judge set a date to give his decision. It was a good hearing for us, said Dr. Charles when they left the courthouse. The judge seemed impressed with our evidence. And now? Now we wait. It may take a few weeks for the decision to come out. While awaiting the court's decision, life went on in St. Vincent Green River. Sarah continued working, the children attended school, and the family routine was more stable. But Richard didn't stay idle. One night, Sarah woke to the sound of engines and lights on the property. She looked out the window and saw 2 tractors on her land, starting to knock down trees and remove stones. "What are you doing here?" she shouted, coming out of the house. The operator of one of the tractors said he had received orders to start preparing the land for construction. "What construction? This land is mine." "We have orders from the landowner, Mr. Richard Mitchell Anderson." Sarah realized it was an attempt at pressure. Richard was trying to intimidate her by showing he had the power to do whatever he wanted on the property. "Stop right now, or I'll call the police," he threatened. "You can call whoever you want. We have written authorization." Sarah called Dr. Charles even though it was the middle of the night. "Doctor, they are invading my property with tractors." "I'll be right there. This is pure intimidation." Dr. Charles arrived with a court officer and managed to stop the work, claiming there was an ongoing legal dispute. "Richard is desperate," said the lawyer. "People who act like this are afraid of losing." 2 days later, the court decision arrived. Dr. Charles called Sarah as soon as he received the notification. "Sarah, we have a partial victory. The judge recognized that Dorothy's will is valid and that you are entitled to the inheritance." "And the other properties?" "For those, he ordered a more in-depth investigation into the sales. But it's a good start." "And Richard?" "He can appeal the decision, but at least now you have legal security over the house and the land." Sarah celebrated with the children and Mrs. Helen. She finally had the certainty that she wouldn't lose the home she had built. But the joy was short-lived. The following week, Dr. Charles received a notification that Richard had filed an appeal and was also suing Sarah for slander and defamation. "He won't give up easily," said the lawyer. "But we won't give up either." Months passed with legal back and forth. Sarah maintained her work routine and care for the children, always with the support of Mrs. Helen. The children grew up happy in the restored house. Emily was excelling in school and dreamed of studying in Eureka Springs when she finished elementary school. Ethan and Mason had discovered a passion for farming and helped Mrs. Helen in her small garden, learning about plant cultivation. Lily became a communicative and intelligent child, loved by everyone in the community. And Noah, now over 2 years old, ran around the backyard playing with his older siblings. One day, Dr. Charles showed up in St. Vincent Green River with important news. "Sarah, the investigation into the properties has borne fruit. We discovered that Richard forged several documents over the years. Is that good for us?" "Very good. The district attorney's office is opening a criminal investigation against him for fraud and document forgery." "And the properties?" "The judge has ordered them to be returned to you. Richard will have to transfer possession of 3 large plots of land that originally belonged to your family." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. 3 large plots? Yes, one of them already has a signed contract with a solar energy company. The other 2 are being evaluated for similar projects. How much could that be worth? According to preliminary estimates, about $5 million. Sarah had to sit down. She had never imagined that so much money could exist in the world. 5 million? Yes. Your family will be financially secure for the rest of your lives. That same day, Richard showed up in St. Vincent Green River, but this time he didn't come to threaten. He came to negotiate. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said with a demeanor very different from the first time. "We have nothing to talk about, Mr. Richard. I have a proposal that might interest you." "I'm not interested in your proposals." "How about I transfer all the properties to you and also pay $2 million in compensation? In return, you drop the criminal charges against me." Sarah looked at Dr. Charles, who shook his head no. "Mr. Richard, the criminal charges did not come from me. It was the district attorney's office that opened the investigation. I cannot withdraw something that is not in my hands." "But you can influence it. You can say you don't want to proceed with the charges." "I won't do that. You deceived my family, threatened my sick aunt, tried to intimidate me. Now you will face the consequences of your actions." Richard turned red with anger, but he could do nothing. He knew he had lost. "You'll regret this," he said before leaving. "The only thing I regret is not having known my family before you destroyed it," Sarah replied. 6 months later, the entire legal process was complete. Sarah had officially received ownership of the 3 properties, and the lease contracts with renewable energy companies guaranteed a monthly income of about $200,000. Richard was convicted of fraud and document forgery, receiving a 4-year prison sentence. Dr. Marcus lost his medical license for participating in the scheme to falsely declare elderly people mentally incompetent. With her financial life settled, Sarah could devote herself entirely to the children and her dreams. Emily won a scholarship to a private school in Eureka Springs and was preparing for the law school entrance exam. Ethan and Mason decided they wanted to study agriculture and veterinary science to better care for the family lands. Lily attended an excellent school and showed talent for arts and music. Noah grew strong and healthy, surrounded by love and opportunities. Sarah completely renovated Dorothy's original house, turning it into a beautiful family home, but she preserved some rooms exactly as they were, in honor of the memory of the aunt she never met in person. In the backyard, she planted a tree and placed a plaque with the names of all the relatives she never had the chance to know. Her grandparents Thomas and Margaret, her mother Jennifer, and her Aunt Dorothy. "Now our family is complete," she said to the children one Sunday afternoon, sitting under the tree. "And we will never be separated again," added Emily. "Never again," confirmed Sarah, hugging all her children. Mrs. Helen, who had become like a grandmother to the children, watched the scene with emotion. "Dorothy would be so happy to see this," she said. "She always dreamed that one day the family would be reunited." "If it weren't for you, Mrs. Helen, none of this would have happened," said Sarah. "You were our guardian angel." "No, my dear, you were Dorothy's guardian angel. You gave meaning to her life, even after she was gone." 3 years later, Emily was studying law at the university in Charlotte on a full scholarship. She came home every weekend and talked about her studies. "Mom, when I graduate, I'm going to work in family law. I want to help people who have been through what we went through." "I'm so proud of you, honey." Ethan and Mason, now 10 years old, were studying at an agricultural school in the region and were already showing interest in different aspects of farm life. Ethan liked the planting and irrigation side more, while Mason was interested in the animals. Lily, at 6 years old, was a bright child who loved to read and draw. Sarah had turned one of the rooms in the house into a library and art studio for her. Miguel, at 5 years old, was a cheerful and clever boy who loved to tag along with his older siblings in their activities. The property had become a model in the region. Besides the renewable energy contracts, Sarah had started a sustainable agriculture project in partnership with universities. Part of the land was designated for environmental preservation, creating an ecological corridor that protected water springs and housed native wildlife. "Our family grew from a house in ruins to all this," said Sarah one morning, watching the children play in the backyard while having coffee with Mrs. Helen. "And all because you didn't give up when it seemed there was no hope," replied the elderly woman. "Sometimes I think Dorothy planned all this, as if she knew I would need to find these clues to discover the truth. Perhaps she really did plan it. Dorothy was smarter than she appeared." One day, Sarah received an unexpected letter. It was from a distant cousin in New York who had read about the case in the press and wanted to get in touch. "I always knew I had relatives in North Carolina," wrote the cousin, Mary Catherine. "My grandmother was your great-grandfather's sister. I would very much like to meet you and the children." The discovery that there was more family spread across the country filled Sarah with joy. Gradually, she uncovered a whole network of relatives she never knew. Some had lost contact over the generations, others didn't even know of each other's existence. But they all carried stories and memories that helped complete the puzzle of the family history. Mary Catherine came to visit them in St. Vincent Green River and brought old photos, documents, and objects that had belonged to their common ancestors. "It's amazing how families spread out and lose touch," she said. "But it seems there's always a force that ends up bringing everyone back together again." "In our case, it was justice," replied Sarah. "It was more than that. It was love. It was determination. It was you not accepting that things were unfair." Over the years, Sarah's story became known in the region. Many people who had suffered similar injustices sought out Dr. Charles for help, inspired by her example. The lawyer, now with more energy and purpose, had set up a practice specializing in recovering the rights of rural families who had been victims of fraud. "You changed my life too," he said to Sarah. "You gave me a reason to keep fighting for justice. And you saved our family, Doctor. We will never forget that." Emily, already in her 3rd year of law, was interning at Dr. Charles's office during the holidays. She was a brilliant student who impressed teachers and classmates. "Mom, I've found my calling," she said during one of her visits home. "I want to work in social justice, defending people who don't have the resources to defend themselves. Your Aunt Dorothy would be proud of you. Sometimes I feel as if she's guiding me. When I study cases similar to ours, it's like I hear her voice giving me strength." Ethan and Mason had developed a school project on sustainable agriculture based on the practices implemented on the family property. The project won a state competition, and they were invited to present it in Washington, D.C. Who would have thought that 2 boys who went hungry would teach about agriculture to the federal government, said Sarah, proud. Lily had discovered a talent for music and was learning piano with a teacher from Eureka Springs. On Sunday afternoons, she played classical music she had learned during the week for the family. Noah had started attending the village school and was already showing interest in math and science. He was a curious child who asked questions about everything. "Why was Uncle Richard mean, Mom?" he asked one day. "He wasn't exactly mean, Noah. He was greedy. He wanted to have more things than he needed and didn't care about hurting other people to get them. And has he learned his lesson now?" "I hope so, son. I hope so." In fact, Richard had been released from prison after serving half his sentence for good behavior. Sarah learned that he had moved to another city and was trying to start over. Part of her felt sorry for the man who had destroyed her family, but most felt satisfaction knowing that justice had been served. One day, she received a letter from him. It was a handwritten plea for forgiveness, where he fully took responsibility for his actions and apologized for the years of suffering he had caused the family. "Sarah, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to try. During these years in prison, I had time to reflect on what I did. I realized my greed destroyed not only your family, but also my own soul. If I could go back in time and undo everything, I would do it without hesitation. Your children are beautiful, and you are an admirable woman. I wish you all the best." Sarah showed the letter to the children. "Should we forgive him, Mom?" asked Emily. "Forgiveness isn't for him, dear. It's for us. So we can move forward without carrying anger in our hearts." "So shall we forgive?" "Yes, we shall." Sarah wrote a reply, saying she forgave Richard and hoped he would find peace in his new life. But she made it clear that forgiveness did not mean forgetting what happened. Years later, Emily graduated from law school with the top grade in her class. At the graduation, she gave an emotional speech about social justice that received a standing ovation from the entire audience. Dr. Charles, now retired but present at the ceremony, had tears in his eyes. "Dorothy planted a seed when she decided to leave that inheritance to your mother," he said to Sarah. "Now we are seeing the tree grow." Emily opened her own law practice in Eureka Springs, specializing in family law and social justice. In her first years of practice, she had already helped dozens of families in situations similar to the one she had lived through. Ethan graduated as an agronomist and took over the management of the family properties, implementing innovative techniques that increased both productivity and environmental sustainability. Mason graduated as a veterinarian and set up a clinic in the region, treating everything from pets to livestock from neighboring farms. Lily developed her musical talent and earned a scholarship to study piano at the Music Conservatory in Charlotte. On weekends, she would return home and give lessons to children in the community. Noah, the youngest, showed an interest in engineering and technology. He wanted to study renewable energy to further enhance the family's projects. "Each of you has found your path," said Sarah at a family gathering on Christmas 2035, when everyone was reunited in the house that had been rebuilt over the ruins. "And it all started with a house in ruins and the courage of a mother who didn't give up," said Emily, raising a toast. "To the Mitchell Anderson family," said Ethan. To justice, added Mason. To music and art, said Lily. To technology and the future, concluded Noah. And to the memory of all who came before us, finished Sarah. Mrs. Helen, now over 80 but still active and sharp, watched the scene with emotion. You know what Dorothy used to tell me in her later years, that she had a recurring dream where she saw a young woman with 5 children living in her house, and that the house was beautiful and full of life. Did she have visions of the future? Asked Noah, curious. I don't know if they were visions or hopes, my boy, but she described you all exactly. Even the children's ages matched. So she knew we would appear, said Sarah. I think so, and that's why she left all those clues hidden around the house. She wanted you to discover the truth. At that moment, everyone felt a loving presence around them, as if Dorothy were there, finally at peace, seeing her family reunited and happy. Thank you, Aunt Dorothy, murmured Sarah, for not giving up on us. A gentle breeze swayed the window curtains like a silent answer. The house that had been accepted in ruins had become not just a home but the center of a prosperous and united family. The secret hidden within its walls was not a treasure of gold or silver, but something far more valuable, the truth, justice, and the love that binds people across generations. And so, the story that began with despair and uncertainty transformed into a saga of courage, determination, and the triumph of good over evil. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story and where you are watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Sarah made the right decisions? We love reading your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.